The first thing Mara Ivash noticed about the void was how it breathed. Not with lungs or gills, but with something older, a rhythm that pulsed through the black expanse beyond Lysara's atmosphere, through the reinforced walls of the research outpost, and into the very marrow of her bones. 34 days stationed at humanity's furthest research facility, and she still couldn't sleep without hearing it. Audio analysis complete, Dr. Ivash. The station's AI announced, its voice calibrated to the perfect pitch of professional detachment. No anomalies detected in Sector 17. Mara rubbed her eyes and stared at the waveform display floating above her workstation. Another dead end. Run it again, she said, knowing the result would be the same. Apply filter sequence Delta 9 this time. The workstation hummed as it processed her request. Outside the observation dome, the gas giant Lysara dominated the view, its swirling storms creating patterns that hypnotized the unwary. The research outpost, officially designated Outpost Epsilon 12, unofficially called the Ear by its inhabitants, orbited in the sweet spot between two of Lysara's largest moons, the perfect place to listen to the universe. Or to listen for its absence. Mara's fingers traced the pendant, hanging around her neck, a small, twisted piece of metal, salvaged from her sister's ship. 5 years since Kira had disappeared on what should have been a routine survey mission. 5 years since her final transmission had cut off mid-sentence, replaced by something the experts called anomalous silence. Not merely an absence of sound, but a presence that devoured it. Dr. Ivash? The AI's voice again, but with a new inflection that drew Mara from her reverie. Commander Hesk requests your presence in the central briefing room. Now? Mara checked the time display. 0300 station standard. What's he doing awake at this hour? The commander did not share his reasons. Priority level indicates mandatory attendance. Mara sighed and saved her work. Joran Hesk had arrived on the station 3 weeks ago, a representative of the consortium, the corporate conglomerate that funded the outpost's research. His military bearing and clipped speech set everyone on edge. But his credentials were impeccable. Former tactical officer turned corporate liaison, with enough pull to make or break careers. The corridors of the outpost were dimmed for night cycle, the soft blue emergency lighting casting long shadows as Mara made her way to the central hub. The station housed 27 researchers and support staff, a mix of humans and non-humans united by their study of what the scientific community blandly termed silence phenomena. What the public didn't know, what only those with the highest clearance understood, was that silence could be weaponized. That's why the consortium was here. That's why they all were. As Mara approached the briefing room, she heard voices, Hesk's commanding tone, and another she recognized as Dr. Soren Che, the station's AI specialist. Their words became clearer as she neared. Unprecedented pattern, Soren was saying. His usually methodical speech quickened with excitement or fear. Mara couldn't tell which. The deep space probe recorded it at the edge of the Ceres Nebula, well beyond our usual monitoring range. And you're certain of the authentication? Hesk asked. The signature is unmistakable, Soren replied. Human in origin, but the interweaving pattern of silence. I have never seen anything like it. Mara stepped through the doorway. Both men turned to look at her, Soren with relief, Hesk with calculation in his eyes. Dr. Ivash, Hesk said, straightening his immaculate uniform jacket. Thank you for joining us at this unconventional hour. Dr. Che was just explaining our situation. Soren nodded to Mara. In his early 40s, with prematurely silver hair and deep-set eyes that reflected the light of the multiple displays surrounding him. He looked exhausted. We've intercepted a distress signal. Or rather, the deep space probe did. A distress signal? From where? Mara asked, moving to the central holoprojector that dominated the room. That's the thing, Soren said, his fingers dancing across the control panel. According to the timestamp, it's over 200 years old. The holoprojector flickered to life, displaying a complex waveform that pulsed with an uneven rhythm. Mara's trained eye immediately recognized the pattern of a standard human distress beacon, the rise and fall of emergency frequencies designed to cut through interstellar noise. But there was something else there, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Between the pulses of the distress signal were perfect voids, not just silence, but an absence so complete it seemed to swallow the light from the display itself. "Play it," she whispered. Soren hesitated, then nodded. "Audio only. The visual components are unsettling." The room's speakers crackled to life, and a voice, distorted by time and distance, filled the space. "This is research vessel Hermes requesting immediate evacuation. We've encountered something in the silence. It's not empty. It's alive. And it's—" The voice cut off, replaced by a void so profound that Mara felt her ears pop, as if the pressure in the room had suddenly changed. Then, in the midst of that terrible silence, a whisper, a familiar whisper. "Mara, is that you?" Mara stumbled backward, her hand clutching at her pendant. That's impossible." Hesk's eyes narrowed. "You recognize the voice." "It's my sister," Mara said, her own voice barely audible. "But that's impossible. This recording is 2 centuries old. Kira disappeared 5 years ago." Soren looked at her with sympathy. The human mind can project familiar patterns onto random stimuli, especially in cases of trauma. "Play it again," Mara demanded, cutting him off. Soren complied. The same message played. The same terrible silence followed. And again, that whisper. "Mara, is that you?" "The silence between the words," Mara said slowly, her scientific training reasserting itself over her emotional shock. "It's not random. There's a pattern there." She moved to the console, fingers flying over the controls as she applied various filters to the recording. "There, isolate that frequency range." The waveform shifted, revealing a secondary pattern embedded within the silence itself, a pattern that matched the final transmission from Kira's ship before it had gone dark. "This is impossible," Soren breathed, leaning in to study the display. "The silence isn't just an absence. It's carrying information. Or it's mimicking it," Hesk said, his voice carrying a note of cold fascination. "Either way, this changes everything," he straightened. Decision made. "We're mounting an expedition to the source. The consortium will provide a ship capable of navigating the Ceres Nebula." "The Ceres Nebula is a death trap," Mara objected. "The silence phenomena there have swallowed entire fleets." "Which is precisely why we need you, Dr. Ivash," Hesk said, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You're the leading expert on silence phenomena, and you have a personal connection to this signal. The expedition leaves in 48 hours. I expect your full cooperation." It wasn't a request. As Hesk strode from the room, Soren turned to Mara. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can find another specialist." Mara shook her head, her fingers still tracing the twisted metal of her pendant. "You heard the recording. That was Kira's voice. I don't know how. I don't know why. But if there's even the slightest chance that she's alive, after 5 years, in a region of space where nothing survives." Soren's voice was gentle but firm. "Mara, you're a scientist. You know what you heard is impossible. 200 years ago, we thought faster-than-light travel was impossible," Mara countered. 50 years ago, we thought communicating with non-carbon-based lifeforms was impossible. 20 years ago, we thought quantifying silence was impossible. She gestured to the waveform still pulsing on the display. "I don't care what's possible. I care what's real. And what's real is that my sister's voice is somehow embedded in a 200-year-old distress signal from the edge of the most silence-contaminated region of space we know. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm going, Soren. With or without your help. Soren studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Well, someone has to make sure you don't get yourself killed. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I suppose I just volunteered. Mara managed a weak smile in return. Thanks, I think. As they prepared to leave the briefing room, the AI's voice interrupted. Dr. Ivash, new analysis of the signal is complete. You may wish to review the results. The display changed, showing a more detailed breakdown of the silence embedded in the distress call. And there, hidden in the deepest layers of the void, was a message, not in words or sounds, but in the precise pattern of the silence itself. It read, Fear not the species that sits in silence. 46 hours later, Mara stood in the docking bay of Outpost Epsilon 12, watching as the last of the equipment was loaded onto the consortium vessel that would carry them into the heart of the Ceres Nebula. The ship, sleek, black, and bristling with technology that likely violated half a dozen interstellar treaties, had arrived with minimal fanfare 12 hours earlier, along with a crew that moved with a coordinated precision that spoke of military training. Impressive, isn't it? Hesk's voice came from behind her. The Harbinger is the most advanced, silence-resistant vessel ever constructed, completely shielded against the phenomena that have claimed so many ships. If it's so advanced, why hasn't it been used to rescue lost expeditions before now? Mara asked, not bothering to hide the edge in her voice. Hesk's smile didn't reach his eyes. Resources must be allocated where they'll do the most good, Dr. Ivash. Until now, the risk-benefit analysis didn't justify the expense. And what changed? You heard what I heard. Something in that nebula is manipulating silence itself, turning it into a communication medium. The scientific and military applications are significant. Before Mara could respond, a new figure approached. Lieutenant Rila Tian, the Harbinger's pilot, tall and lithe, with the distinctive blue-tinged skin and silver eyes of those born in the low-gravity colonies of Titan. Rila moved with a fluid grace that made the standard-issue consortium flight suit look like high fashion. Commander Hesk, Dr. Ivash. She greeted them with a nod. Final pre-flight checks are complete. We're cleared for departure in 30 minutes. Excellent, Lieutenant, Hesk said. Are the special containment systems operational? Something flickered across Rila's face. Discomfort. Perhaps, or concern. But it was gone so quickly that Mara wondered if she'd imagined it. Yes, sir. All systems are nominal. Containment systems? Mara asked. Standard protocol for research expeditions of this nature, Hesk replied smoothly. In case we encounter anything valuable. The way he said valuable made Mara's skin crawl. Before she could press the issue, Soren joined them, his arms full of data pads and portable analysis equipment. I've uploaded all our data on the signal to the Harbinger systems, he reported. And I've prepared some specialized algorithms that might help us track the source more precisely once we're in the nebula. Good work, Dr. Che, Hesk said. Your expertise with the ship's AI systems will be crucial for this mission. Soren nodded, but Mara noticed the slight furrow between his brows. Like her, he suspected there was more to this expedition than a simple rescue or research mission. The final boarding call came over the station's communication system, and the small group made their way up the loading ramp and into the Harbinger. Inside, the ship was a marvel of engineering, sleek, efficient, and clearly designed for more than just scientific exploration. The corridors were lined with reinforced bulkheads, and Mara spotted at least 3 separate security checkpoints before they reached the bridge. The science team will be quartered on Deck C, Hesk informed them, as they moved through the ship. The laboratory facilities there have been equipped according to your specifications. Dr. Ivash. And how large is our team? Mara asked, noting the expansive size of the vessel. Including you and Dr. Che, the science contingent numbers 6. The ship's crew is 15, plus myself. 23 souls venturing into the most dangerous region of known space. Soren murmured. I hope the Harbinger lives up to its reputation. It will, Rila said, with the quiet confidence of someone who had merged her consciousness with the ship's systems more times than she could count. The Harbinger can withstand silence concentrations that would dissolve standard hulls in seconds. The nebula is dangerous, but we're more dangerous. Something in her tone made Mara wonder if the lieutenant was trying to convince them or herself. The departure from Outpost Epsilon 12 was smoother than Mara expected. Within hours, the gas giant Lysara was just another bright point among the stars, and the Harbinger was accelerating toward the distant smudge of darkness that marked the edge of the Ceres Nebula. Mara spent those hours in the laboratory, analyzing and reanalyzing the distress signal, searching for any additional information hidden in its patterns. The message embedded in the silence, "Fear not the species that sits in silence," continued to haunt her. What species? Humans, or something else entirely? Her concentration was broken by the arrival of the other members of the science team, a xenobiologist named Dr. Alara Voss, whose specialty was the physiological effects of silence exposure, Dr. Thomas Reed, a physicist focusing on the quantum properties of silence phenomena, and Dr. Nim Kaldar, a non-human specialist in deep space communication whose 6-fingered hands moved with hypnotic precision over the laboratory equipment. Dr. Ivash. Alara greeted her with a warm smile that contrasted with her clinical white lab coat. We've all read your papers on the linguistic properties of silence. It's an honor to work with you. Likewise, Mara replied, grateful for the distraction from her increasingly circular thoughts. Though I wish it were under different circumstances. The Ceres Nebula has been off-limits to research vessels for decades, Thomas said, his excitement barely contained. The concentrations of silence there are higher than anywhere else in charted space. The data we could collect. Assuming we survive long enough to collect it, Nim added, their multifaceted eyes, reflecting the light of the laboratory displays in kaleidoscopic patterns. The nebula has claimed 97 vessels in the last century alone. None have returned intact. This ship is different, Alara said confidently, and we have Dr. Ivash's expertise to guide us. Mara wished she shared their confidence. The truth was, for all her research, for all her published papers and acclaimed discoveries, she understood silence phenomena about as well as ancient humans had understood lightning. Enough to fear it, enough to study its effects, but nowhere near enough to control it. And yet, here they were, racing toward the heart of the storm. The first sign of trouble came 16 hours into their journey. As the Harbinger approached the outer boundary of the nebula, Mara was in her quarters, finally attempting to get some rest, when the ship's AI announced, "Attention all personnel. Entering silence-affected space. Commencing Level 1 protocols." The lights dimmed momentarily, then brightened again as the ship's specialized shielding activated. Mara felt a slight pressure in her ears, similar to the sensation of descending in an elevator, as the environmental systems adjusted to compensate for the subtle effects of the surrounding silence. She was just about to return to her bunk when her communication panel chimed, "Dr. Ivash to the bridge. Priority Alpha." Hastily pulling on her uniform, Mara made her way through the corridors, noting the increased activity as crew members moved with practiced efficiency to their assigned stations. When she reached the bridge, she found Hesk standing before the main view screen, his posture rigid as he stared at the image it displayed. The nebula stretched before them, a vast, roiling darkness that seemed to devour the stars themselves. Unlike most nebulae, which glowed with the remnants of stellar birth or death, the Ceres Nebula was a void a region of space where light itself seemed to struggle to exist. "We're picking up unusual readings," Hesk said without turning. "Dr. Che believes they match the frequency pattern of the distress signal." Soren looked up from his console, his face pale in the blue light of the displays. "It's not just similar, it's identical. The same pattern, but stronger, much stronger." "Can you pinpoint the source?" Mara asked, moving to join him at the science station. "That's the problem," Soren replied, gesturing to the display. "According to these readings, the source is everywhere. The entire nebula is resonating with the pattern." Lieutenant Rila's hands moved over the pilot's controls with practiced precision. "Navigation is becoming difficult," she reported. "Standard sensors are degrading. Switching to backup systems." "The silence is affecting our technology already?" Alara asked from her station, concern evident in her voice. "We're barely at the edge of the nebula." "This isn't ordinary silence phenomena," Hesk stated, his voice tight with barely contained excitement or fear, perhaps both. "This is something new, something active." As if in response to his words, the ship's communication system crackled to life, emitting a burst of static that resolved into a voice, the same voice from the distress signal, but clearer now, more present. "This is research vessel Hermes requesting immediate evacuation. We've encountered something in the silence. It's not empty. It's alive. And it's—" The now familiar silence followed. But this time, it seemed to fill the bridge itself, creating a pressure that made breathing difficult. And then, emerging from that terrible void, a whisper. "Mara, is that you? I've been waiting." Every eye on the bridge turned to Mara, whose knuckles had gone white as she gripped the edge of the console. "It's a trap," she said, her voice barely audible. "It has to be." "Or it's exactly what we came here to find," Hesk countered. "A genuine contact with whatever entity is manipulating the silence. Lieutenant Tien, take us in. Full power to the shields." "Sir," Rila began, her silver eyes wide with concern. "Regulations require a full risk assessment before—" "This is my expedition, Lieutenant," Hesk cut her off. "And I'm ordering you to proceed." For a moment, it seemed Rila might refuse. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, she entered the commands that would take them deeper into the nebula. The Harbinger moved forward, its specialized engines pushing against the increasing resistance of the silence-saturated space. On the view screen, the darkness of the nebula seemed to reach out toward them, tendrils of void curling around the visual feed like living smoke. "All systems holding," Soren reported, though the strain in his voice belied his words. Silence, concentration increasing, but still within tolerable parameters. Dr. Nim Keldar joined them on the bridge, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the ominous display. "I've been monitoring the communication frequencies," they said. "The signal is evolving, becoming more complex. It's as if it's learning from our presence." "Can you establish a direct communication link?" Hesk asked. "Inadvisable," Nim replied firmly. "We don't know what we're dealing with. Standard first contact protocols." "This isn't a standard situation, Dr. Keldar," Hesk interrupted. "And time is a luxury we may not have. Establish the link." Nim hesitated, then moved to the communication console. "I'll set up a one-way channel first. We'll listen before we transmit." As they worked, Mara felt a growing unease. The nebula on the view screen seemed to be watching them, its darkness pulsing with an almost imperceptible rhythm that matched the beat of her own heart. And beneath that rhythm, she could feel something else, a presence that seemed to press against the edges of her consciousness. "Channel open," Nim announced. "Receiving something." The bridge speakers emitted a sound that wasn't quite sound, more like the memory of sound, or its absence given voice. It washed over them in waves that made Mara's teeth ache and her vision blur. And then, clarity. A voice that was somehow both alien and familiar spoke directly into their minds. The species that sits in silence returns to the void. You bring the one who hears. Mara felt rather than heard the words, as if they had bypassed her ears entirely and resonated directly with something deep within her brain. Around her, she saw the others react with varying degrees of discomfort or alarm, all except Hesk, whose face had taken on a look of rapturous fascination. Incredible, he breathed. Direct neural interface through manipulated silence. The military applications alone. Who are you? Mara interrupted, addressing the presence directly. What do you want with us? For a moment, there was only the deep, pulsing silence. Then, we are the absence that speaks. We have always been here, in the spaces between your words, your thoughts, your stars, and you, Mara Ivash, have always been listening. The use of her name sent a chill down Mara's spine. How do you know me? We know the pattern of your grief. We have tasted the silence in your heart where your sister once lived. We have borrowed her voice to call you here. Where is she? Mara demanded, stepping forward as if she could physically confront the nebula itself. What have you done with Kira? She is here. She is nowhere. She is part of the silence now, as all things eventually must be. Hesk moved to the communication console, his eyes alight with a fervor that made him look half-mad in the eerie light of the nebula. We seek to understand your nature, he said, his voice taking on the formal cadence of practiced diplomacy. We come with respect and the desire for mutual exchange of knowledge. A sound that might have been laughter rippled through the bridge, though no one present had made a sound. You come with weapons hidden in your words. Joran Hesk, you seek to harness the silence, to bend it to your will, to turn it against those you name enemy. We have seen this before. We will see it again. The cycle continues. Hesk's expression hardened. You've been monitoring our communications, our secure channels. There is no security in silence, only truth, stripped bare. Lieutenant Rila's voice cut through the increasingly tense exchange. Commander, silence concentrations are approaching critical levels. The ship's shielding is beginning to fail in sections. We need to pull back. Hesk ignored her. If you can read our thoughts, then you know we have the technology to contain and study silence phenomena. We could offer an exchange. You cannot contain what you cannot comprehend, human. But we will show you. We will open the door. The view screen flickered. The image of the nebula replaced by something that made several crew members cry out in alarm. It was a view of the interior of a ship, ancient by current standards, its corridors lit by the emergency lighting of a vessel in distress. And moving through those corridors were the crew, or what remained of them. They walked like puppets with half their strings cut, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Their mouths were open in silent screams, and their eyes were not eyes at all, but voids that seemed to tunnel back into infinity. The Hermes, Soren whispered. That's the ship from the distress call. But that's impossible. It disappeared over 2 centuries ago. Time means nothing to silence, the presence said, its voice now coming from the figures on the screen. These ones discovered us first. They opened themselves to the void. They became our voice. The image shifted, focusing on one figure in particular, a woman whose features were hauntingly similar to Mara's own. She moved differently from the others, with more purpose. Her void-filled eyes seeming to look directly at the viewers. Kira, Mara breathed, her hand unconsciously reaching toward the screen. The figure's mouth moved, but instead of words, silence poured out, a silence so profound that several display screens on the bridge cracked under its pressure. Enough, the presence declared, and the image vanished, replaced once more by the swirling darkness of the nebula. You have seen. Now you must choose. The silence offers communion or consumption. Which do you seek, harbinger of humanity? Before anyone could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. "Multiple hull breaches," Rila reported, her fingers flying over the controls. "Silence is penetrating our shields." "Full reverse," Hesk ordered. "Get us out of here." "Too late," Soren said, his voice eerily calm as he stared at his console. "Look, on the external cameras." They could see it now. The darkness of the nebula was no longer simply surrounding them. It was flowing onto the ship itself, seeping through the specialized shielding as if it were no barrier at all, coating the hull in a layer of void that seemed to devour the very light that touched it. "It's consuming the ship," Dr. Alara Voss said, horror evident in her voice. "Just like the theoretical models predicted. Silence as an active, consuming force." "All hands, emergency protocols," Hesk barked into the ship-wide communication system. "Prepare for—" His words were cut off as the bridge lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the glow of emergency lighting and the ominous void substance now creeping along the edges of the view screen. In that moment of darkness, Mara heard it, a whisper, so close it could have been her own thought. "The door's open, sister. Step through." And then, the lights returned. The ship's systems rebooting as emergency protocols engaged. But something had changed. The nebula on the view screen no longer seemed threatening. It had retreated, leaving a clear path ahead. "What just happened?" Thomas asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "It was testing us," Mara said slowly, the realization dawning. "Or welcoming us." "Sensors are back online," Rila reported. "And this can't be right. According to our navigation system, we're now deep within the nebula, at least 3 days' journey from our previous position." "That's not possible," Soren began, but Hesk cut him off. "It teleported us," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "The silence entity moved our entire ship instantaneously." "Or it altered our perception of time and space," Mara countered. "We could have been traveling for those 3 days without being aware of it." "Either way," Hesk said, "we've been granted access to the heart of the nebula, to the source of the silence. This is precisely what we came for." He turned to address the bridge crew. "Maintain current position. All science personnel, report to the primary laboratory. We need to understand what just happened and how to harness it." As the others filed out, Mara lingered on the bridge, her eyes drawn to the view screen, where the nebula now seemed almost peaceful, its darkness less threatening and more inviting. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Rila said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "In a terrifying sort of way." Mara nodded. "It's alive, somehow, not like us, but conscious." "And it knows you," Rila observed. "It called you by name. It showed you your sister." "Or something wearing her face," Mara replied, her hand moving to the pendant at her neck. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Rila's silver eyes studied her for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think you should be careful around Commander Hesk. The way he looked when that thing was speaking to us. Like he'd found something he'd been searching for his entire life." "You think he knew more about this mission than he told us?" "I think," Rila said carefully, "that the consortium doesn't send ships like the Harbinger on rescue missions or scientific expeditions. This vessel was designed for acquisition and containment of potentially dangerous resources. I should know. I've piloted 3 similar missions." Before Mara could respond, the ship's AI announced, "Dr. Ivash, your presence is requested in the primary laboratory." With a final glance at the now serene nebula, Mara turned and made her way off the bridge, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. The laboratory was a hive of activity when she arrived. Soren and the other scientists were gathered around a central display, analyzing data from the recent encounter, while Hesk stood slightly apart, speaking in low tones into a secure communication device. "Duh. Most extraordinary discovery," he was saying, The entity appears capable of manipulating silence as a physical force, as well as a communication medium. The potential applications for the Silence Initiative are beyond our most optimistic projections. He noticed Mara's arrival and quickly concluded his call. Dr. Ivash, excellent. We were just discussing the implications of our encounter. Who are you reporting to? Mara asked bluntly. Hesk's expression hardened slightly. Consortium leadership, of course. This expedition represents a significant investment of resources. They're understandably eager for updates. Before Mara could press further, Dr. Alara Voss called her over to the main display. You need to see this, she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. We've been analyzing the biometric data from when the entity was communicating with us. The display showed a series of brain scans, each labeled with the name of a crew member present on the bridge during the encounter. These patterns, Alara explained, pointing to specific areas of heightened activity. They're unprecedented. The entity wasn't just speaking to us. It was resonating directly with our neural pathways, creating a form of communication that bypassed our auditory systems entirely. Like telepathy, Mara asked. More like forced empathy, Alara corrected. It created a bridge between its consciousness and ours, using silence as the medium. But look at this one. She highlighted Mara's scan, which showed significantly more activity than the others, particularly in regions associated with memory and emotional processing. The entity established a much stronger connection with you than with anyone else, Alara said. It was focused on you specifically. Because of Kira, Mara murmured. It said it knew my grief. Not just that, Dr. Nim Keldar interjected, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the light of the display in kaleidoscopic patterns. According to these readings, your brain is structured to perceive silence differently than most humans. You don't just study it, you resonate with it on a fundamental level. That's absurd, Mara objected. I'm not special. I just happen to specialize in silence phenomena because of what happened to your sister, Hesk finished for her, joining their group. Or perhaps your sister disappeared because of your shared sensitivity to silence. Have you considered that possibility, Dr. Ivash? That the entity has been aware of you, of your family, for much longer than you've been aware of it? The implication sent a chill down Mara's spine. That's speculation, Commander. We need facts, not theories. What we need, Hesk said firmly, is to establish consistent communication with the entity. And you, Dr. Ivash, appear to be our best conduit for that communication. He turned to the others. Prepare the specialized equipment in Laboratory B. If the entity reaches out again, I want us ready to respond and to record every aspect of the interaction. As the team dispersed to carry out his orders, Soren approached Mara. Are you okay? He asked quietly. That was intense back there. Mara realized she was still clutching her pendant, her knuckles white with tension. She forced herself to relax her grip. I'm fine, just processing. Soren's expression made it clear he didn't believe her, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he said, There's something else you should know. I've been analyzing the ship's system since our encounter with the entity. There are protocols embedded in the AI's core programming that weren't part of the specifications I was given. What kind of protocols? Weapon systems, for one thing. The Harbinger isn't just shielded against silence. It's designed to collect and contain it. And there's something called Project Echo that's referenced repeatedly in the secure files. But I can't access the details without Commander Hesk's authorization. Mara wasn't surprised. She'd suspected from the beginning that the consortium had motives beyond scientific discovery. But hearing it confirmed only heightened her unease. We need to be careful, she said. The entity said Hesk comes with weapons hidden in his words. It knows why we're really here. And yet it brought us deeper into the nebula, Soren pointed out. Why do that if it perceives us as a threat? Before Mara could speculate on an answer, The ship's AI announced, "Attention all personnel. Silence concentrations increasing throughout the vessel. All non-essential systems powering down to conserve energy." The laboratory lights dimmed, and several of the less critical displays went dark. In the sudden quiet, Mara became aware of a subtle vibration running through the deck plates beneath her feet, a rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. "It's starting again," she whispered. The vibration intensified, and with it came a pressure in her mind, a presence pushing against the boundaries of her consciousness, seeking entry. Around her, she saw the others react with varying degrees of discomfort. Soren pressing his hands to his temples, Ilara steadying herself against a console, Nim's multifaceted eyes shifting rapidly through colors that indicated distress in their species. Only Hesk seemed unaffected, his expression one of intense concentration rather than pain. "It's attempting contact," he said, his voice cutting through the growing silence. "Dr. Ivash, focus on the presence. Try to establish a connection." Mara wanted to refuse, to shield herself from the entity's intrusion. But a part of her, the part that had never stopped searching for Kira, pushed her forward. Closing her eyes, she allowed her mental barriers to lower, reaching out toward the presence that pulsed at the edges of her mind. The contact, when it came, was like plunging into an ocean of absolute darkness, a void so complete that it seemed to consume her very sense of self. For a terrifying moment, Mara felt herself dissolving, her consciousness dispersing into the vastness of the silence. Then, anchoring her, a voice, Kira's voice. "Focus, Mara. Remember who you are." Mara clung to the voice, using it as a lifeline to pull herself back from the brink of dissolution. Gradually, the darkness resolved into a space, not physical, but a construct created by her mind to make sense of the experience. She found herself standing in what appeared to be the bridge of an ancient ship, the Hermes from the earlier vision. But the crew members were gone, replaced by shifting shadows that moved with purpose through the dimly lit space. And before her stood Kira, or something wearing Kira's form. Her sister looked just as she had 5 years ago, tall and angular, with the same dark eyes and determined set to her jaw that Mara saw in the mirror each day. But there was something wrong about her eyes. They were too dark, too deep, as if they opened onto the void itself. "Is it really you?" Mara asked, her voice echoing strangely in the constructed space. "Parts of me," Kira, or the entity using her form, replied. "Enough to remember, enough to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "About the man who leads your ship, about what he intends to do with the silence." "Hesk, what does he want?" "The same thing humans always want. Power. Control. The silence can be weaponized. Mara. Turned into something that devours thought, memory, identity. He knows this. His masters know this. They sent him to capture a piece of us, to take it back and bend it to their will." "And what do you want?" Mara asked, suddenly aware that she was speaking not just to a simulacrum of her sister, but to the entity itself. The figure that was and wasn't Kira smiled sadly. "To exist, to commune, to share the gift of true silence with those who can bear it." "Gift? You call what happened to the Hermes a gift?" "They were not ready. They feared the silence, fought against it. Fear transforms silence into a consuming void. Acceptance transforms it into communion." "And Kira, was she ready?" The figure's expression shifted, becoming both more and less like Kira, a strange amalgamation of human features and something entirely other. "She is becoming, as all things must, as you might, if you choose." Before Mara could respond, the constructed space around them shuddered, the image of the Hermes's bridge fragmenting like glass under pressure. "He comes," the entity said, its voice no longer just Kira's, but a chorus of countless voices, speaking in unison. "He brings the weapon that wounds silence. You must decide, Mara Ivash. Will you stand with your kind, who seek to harness what they fear, or with the silence, which offers peace beyond understanding. The vision shattered completely, and Mara found herself back in the laboratory of the Harbinger, gasping for breath as if she'd been underwater. Around her, the other scientists were similarly disoriented, struggling to reorient themselves after the intense psychic contact. But Hesk was already in motion, issuing commands into his communication device. "Activate Protocol Echo. The entity has made contact. Prepare the containment chamber." "Wait!" Mara called out, her voice hoarse. "What are you doing?" Hesk turned to her, his eyes fever-bright with excitement. "What we came here to do, Dr. Ivash. To capture a sample of the silence entity for study and application. Your connection to it has provided exactly the pathway we needed." "You can't contain it," Mara objected. "It's not just a phenomena. It's conscious. It's vast. And it knows what you're planning." "Of course it does," Hesk replied with a cold smile. "Why do you think it reached out to you specifically? It fears what we might do with its power. It's trying to turn you against your own species. Dr. Ivash, don't let it." He addressed the room at large. "The entity has shown its hand. It's vulnerable when it attempts to communicate. The next time it reaches out, we'll be ready to capture a portion of its consciousness in the specialized containment systems. Dr. Che, you'll monitor the ship's AI to ensure it isn't compromised during the process." Soren nodded reluctantly, his expression troubled. "And if the entity resists? Then we'll take what we need by force," Hesk said simply. "The Harbinger is equipped with silence disruption technology specifically designed for this purpose. One way or another, we will not leave this nebula empty-handed." As the laboratory erupted into activity, Mara exchanged a glance with Soren. The entity had warned her about Hesk's intentions, but what it was offering instead, communion with the silence, was equally troubling. Caught between two forces, she didn't fully understand or trust. Mara felt the weight of an impossible choice settling onto her shoulders. And beneath it all, the question that had driven her for 5 years. What had really happened to Kira? Was her sister truly part of the silence entity now? Or was the entity merely using Kira's memory to manipulate her? The answers, Mara suspected, lay deeper in the nebula, in the heart of the silence itself. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Hesk ordered the Harbinger deeper into the nebula, following energy signatures that the science team identified as potential nexus points of the silence entity. As they progressed, the ship's systems became increasingly erratic, communications failing, life support fluctuating, artificial gravity wavering in certain sections. More disturbing were the effects on the crew. Reports came in from throughout the ship of hallucinations, disorientation, and in 2 severe cases, crew members found in catatonic states, their eyes open but unseeing, their mouths forming words with no sound. Dr. Alara Voss established a makeshift medical bay in one of the more stable sections of the ship, treating the afflicted with neural stabilizers that seemed to provide temporary relief. But it was clear that the longer they remained in the nebula, the worse the effects would become. "The silence is affecting our neural pathways," she explained to Mara as they monitored the latest victim, a young engineer who had been found staring into a maintenance hatch, unresponsive to all stimuli. "It's as if it's rewiring us, changing how we perceive reality." "Or showing us what's really there," Mara suggested, recalling her vision of the Hermes. "What if what we call hallucinations are actually glimpses of truths our minds normally filter out?" Alara looked troubled by the suggestion. "If that's the case, then the deeper we go, the more our understanding of reality will break down. We could lose ourselves entirely." "Some of the crew already have," Lieutenant Rila said, joining their conversation. The pilot looked exhausted, silver eyes dulled by fatigue and stress. "Commander Hesk has ordered them placed in stasis until we can return to normal space. And when will that be? Mara asked. We're moving deeper into the nebula, not toward its edge. The commander believes we're close to the source, to the heart of the entity. Once we've acquired what we came for, we'll begin our return journey. Ryla's tone made it clear she had doubts about the feasibility of this plan. And if we can't find our way back? Alara voiced the concern that hung over the entire crew. No ship that's ventured this deep into the Ceres Nebula has ever returned. We're not like other ships, Hesk's voice interrupted as he entered the medical bay. The Harbinger was built for exactly this mission. Its navigation systems are key to the unique energy signature of our entry point. No matter how deep we go, we can find our way back. His confidence should have been reassuring, but Mara found it chilling instead. There was something almost fanatical in Hesk's determination, a zealot's certainty that reminded her of historical accounts of explorers who had led their crews to disaster in pursuit of glory or wealth. Commander, she said carefully, I think we need to reconsider our approach. The entity is clearly affecting the crew. We're not equipped to handle this level of psychic influence. On the contrary, Dr. Ivash, Hesk replied. Every reaction the crew is experiencing has been anticipated and prepared for. The consortium has been studying silence phenomena for decades. The current effects are well within acceptable parameters. Acceptable, Alara echoed incredulously, gesturing to the catatonic engineer. These people may suffer permanent neurological damage. A risk they accepted when they joined this mission, Hesk said dismissively, and one that will be amply compensated if they survive. The callousness of his response shocked even Rila, whose professional demeanor briefly cracked. They weren't told what they were really signing up for, she said, her silver eyes flashing. None of us were. Hesk's expression hardened. Lieutenant Tien, you're relieved of duty for the next 12 hours. Get some rest. You're clearly suffering from nebula-induced stress. He turned to Mara and Alara. As for you two, I suggest you focus on your assigned tasks rather than questioning command decisions. We've come too far to turn back now. After he left, a heavy silence fell over the medical bay, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitoring equipment. He's going to get us all killed, Rila said quietly. Or worse. What could be worse than death? Alara asked. Becoming like them, Mara answered, nodding toward the catatonic engineer. Trapped between worlds, neither alive nor dead, neither silent nor speaking. Rila's expression was grim. There are 16 crew members still functional, 5 in medical stasis, 6 science personnel including you two, and Hesk. If we took a vote right now on whether to continue or turn back, it wouldn't matter, Alara interrupted. The Harbinger's command protocols give Hesk final authority. The ship's AI will only respond to a retreat order from him, unless he's certified as medically unfit for command. And who has the authority to make that certification? Mara asked. The ship's chief medical officer, Alara replied. Which would be me, but I'd need clear evidence of mental instability or incapacitation, and Hesk is many things. But he's not insane or incapable. He knows exactly what he's doing. Which makes him all the more dangerous, Rila murmured. Before they could continue their conversation, the ship's AI announced, Attention all personnel. We have reached the designated coordinates. All science team members report to the primary laboratory. All security personnel to your assigned stations. Initiate Protocol Echo in 30 minutes. Mara and Alara exchanged a look of concern before hurrying to the laboratory. They found Soren already there, his face pale as he worked at the main console. What's happening? Mara asked him quietly. Hesk has located what he believes is the central nexus of the silence entity. Soren replied, his voice low. He's preparing to deploy the extraction device, a specialized probe designed to capture and contain a portion of the silence consciousness. And you're helping him? Alara asked, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Soren's expression was pained. I'm trying to minimize the damage. The original protocol called for a much more aggressive approach that would likely have provoked a catastrophic response from the entity. I've convinced Hesk to try a more gradual extraction. It's still theft, Mara said. The entity is conscious, Soren. We'd be ripping away a piece of its mind. I know, he admitted. But Hesk will proceed with or without our help. At least this way, we have some influence over the process. Before they could continue their debate, Hesk entered the laboratory, accompanied by 4 security personnel in specialized protective suits. Behind them floated a cylindrical device about the size of a human torso, the extraction probe, Mara presumed. We are about to make history, Hesk announced, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed this speech many times. In 30 minutes, we will capture a sample of the most powerful force known to humanity, conscious silence. With it, the consortium will revolutionize everything from communication to warfare, from medicine to space travel. He turned to Mara. Dr. Ivash, your connection to the entity will be crucial for this operation. You will serve as the lure, the focal point that draws the entity's attention while the probe extracts a sample. And if I refuse? Mara asked, though she already knew the answer. Hesk's smile was cold. Then, I'll be forced to use one of our catatonic crew members instead. Their partially altered neural pathways would serve adequately, though with a higher risk of complete extraction failure. And collateral damage to the ship. It was blackmail, plain and simple. Mara looked to Soren and Alara for support, but they looked as trapped as she felt. Fine, she said finally. But I want it on record that I'm participating under protest. Noted, Hesk replied, unconcerned. Now, if you'll follow me to the extraction chamber, we can begin preparations. The extraction chamber was located in the most heavily shielded section of the Harbinger, a spherical room at the core of the ship. Its walls lined with specialized materials designed to contain and channel silence phenomena. In the center stood a single chair, surrounded by a ring of equipment that hummed with barely restrained power. As Mara was secured into the chair, monitoring devices attached to her temples and wrists, she felt a growing sense of dread, not fear for herself, but fear of what they were about to unleash. The entity had warned her about Hesk's intentions. It had called the silence a gift for those who could bear it, and a consuming void for those who feared it. And Hesk, for all his clinical detachment, was driven by fear. Fear disguised as ambition, as the desire for control. What would happen when such a man tore a piece from a being of pure silence? The extraction probe is charged and ready, one of the technicians reported. Neural interface online. Excellent, Hesk said, moving to stand before Mara. Dr. Ivash, your role is simple. When we activate the system, reach out to the entity as you did before. Establish contact. Hold that connection for exactly 60 seconds. The probe will do the rest. And then what? Mara asked. Once you have your sample, what happens to the rest of the entity? What happens to the crew members already affected by it? One step at a time. Doctor, Hesk replied evasively. Let's secure our prize first, then worry about the aftermath. It was the answer she had expected, and it confirmed her worst fears. Hesk had no exit strategy, no plan beyond capturing the silence. Whatever happened afterward was, in his mind, an acceptable risk. As the final preparations were made, Soren approached her chair, ostensibly to check the monitoring equipment. Something's wrong with the ship's AI, he whispered. It's becoming erratic, giving contradictory commands in some sections. I think the entity is already influencing our systems. Before Mara could respond, Hesk called out, Commence the extraction sequence, all personnel. Stand clear of the neural interface zone. The equipment surrounding Mara hummed to life, creating a field of energy that made her skin tingle, and her thoughts blur at the edges. She could feel the probe reaching through her, using her consciousness as a conduit to the entity beyond. Dr. Ivash, Hesk urged, establish contact now. Reluctantly, Mara closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, seeking the presence she had touched before. This time, the contact came almost instantly, as if the entity had been waiting for her. Once again, she found herself in the constructed space of the Hermes' bridge. But it had changed. The shadows that had moved through it before were gone, replaced by a pulsing darkness that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. And standing before her was not Kira, but a figure composed of shifting silence, a humanoid shape that seemed to be made from the absence of light, the absence of sound, the absence of everything. "You have returned," it said, its voice resonating directly in her mind. "But not alone. You bring the thief who would wound us." "I didn't have a choice," Mara tried to explain. "He threatened the crew." "There is always choice, Mara Ivash, even in silence, especially in silence." She could feel it now, the probe, pushing through the mental connection she had established, reaching greedily for the consciousness of the entity. And she could feel the entity's response, not fear, not anger, but a deep, resonating sadness that threatened to overwhelm her. "They do not understand what they take," the entity continued. "Silence is not a tool. It is not a weapon. It is the space between heartbeats, the pause between words, the moment between breaths. It is where meaning lives." "Then help me stop this," Mara pleaded. "Show them they're wrong." "It is too late. The wound is opening. The void hungers. What they fear, they will become." The constructed space around them began to fracture, cracks of absolute darkness spreading across the illusory bridge of the Hermes. Through those cracks, Mara could see glimpses of the extraction chamber, of Hesk's triumphant face as the probe began to fill with a swirling darkness, of Soren's growing alarm as warning lights flashed across his monitoring equipment. "Something's wrong," she heard Soren shout, his voice distant and distorted. "The containment field is destabilizing." "Increase power to the field generators," Hesk ordered. "We're almost there." "You must choose now, Mara Ivash," the entity said, its form beginning to disperse into the fracturing space. The thief tears at our essence. The wound spreads. What was communion becomes consumption. With a sudden, terrible clarity, Mara understood. The extraction wasn't simply removing a piece of the entity. It was creating a rupture in its very nature, transforming the conscious silence into the consuming void it had warned her about. "How do I stop it?" she asked desperately. "The voice that speaks to silence can also bind it." The sister knew. Now you must know. And in that moment, Mara saw it, the truth of what had happened to Kira. Her sister hadn't been consumed by the silence. She had sacrificed herself to contain it, to prevent exactly what Hesk was now attempting. The vision shattered completely, and Mara found herself back in the extraction chamber. But everything had changed. The probe, now filled with swirling darkness, was vibrating violently, its containment fields flickering as the captured silence fought against its boundaries. "We've done it," Hesk exulted, oblivious to the warnings flashing across every monitor. "The sample is secured." "No, it's not," Soren contradicted him, his voice tight with fear. "The containment field is failing. Whatever we've captured, it's not just a sample. It's fighting back." As if in response to his words, the probe shuddered one final time, then cracked, a hairline fracture that shouldn't have been possible in a device made from the most advanced materials known to science. From that crack poured not light, not sound, but their absence, a consuming darkness that seemed to devour the very air it touched. "Evacuate the chamber," Hesk ordered, his triumphant certainty giving way to fear. "Seal off this section!" But it was too late. The darkness from the probe was spreading with impossible speed, flowing across the floor, up the walls, encircling the equipment and the personnel with tendrils of void that seemed almost curious in their exploration. And everywhere it touched, silence followed. Not just the absence of sound, but a deeper silence that seemed to reach into the mind itself, stilling thought, memory, identity. Two of the technicians were caught in its embrace, their bodies freezing in place as the darkness enveloped them. Their eyes went wide, then empty, as if something essential had been suctioned out through their gaze. Mara, still strapped to the chair at the center of the room, could only watch as the chaos unfolded around her. The entity's words echoed in her mind. The voice that speaks to silence can also bind it. Understanding dawned. The entity wasn't attacking them. It was wounded, bleeding, its nature transformed by the violation of the extraction. And Mara, with her unique connection to it, might be the only one who could heal that wound. As the darkness approached her chair, she closed her eyes and reached out once more, not with fear, but with acceptance. Not seeking to control or contain, but to commune. "I hear you," she whispered to the silence. "I understand now." The advancing darkness paused, hovering at the edges of her chair as if listening. In that moment of connection, Mara saw everything: the true nature of the silence entity, the history of its interaction with humanity, the role it played in the delicate balance of the cosmos. She saw Kira's final moments, not as tragedy, but as transcendence, as her sister willingly bound a portion of her consciousness to the silence to prevent its transformation into the consuming void. And she saw what she needed to do. As alarms blared throughout the ship and the remaining personnel fled the chamber, Mara began to speak, not in words, but in the language of silence itself. She shaped the spaces between sounds, the pauses between breaths, crafting them into a pattern that resonated with the wounded entity. The darkness around her chair pulsed in response, its movement changing from chaotic to rhythmic, matching the cadence of her silent speech. "What is she doing?" Hesk demanded, pausing at the chamber door as he noticed the change. "I think," Soren said slowly, watching in awe, "she's communicating with it. No, she's healing it." "Stop her!" Hesk ordered the remaining security personnel. "The sample is our priority!" But before they could move, the darkness surged between them and Mara, forming a barrier that none dared to cross. In the center of the storm, Mara continued her silent communion, feeling the entity's wounded consciousness respond to her call. The pain was immense, not physical, but a psychic agony that threatened to tear her mind apart. Yet she persisted, shaping the silence, binding it not with technology or force, but with understanding. "The wound closes." The entity's voice resonated in her mind. "But the price is high. To bind silence, one must become silence." Mara understood. Just as Kira had sacrificed a piece of herself to contain the entity before, now Mara would have to do the same. But where Kira had acted in desperate haste, Mara could make her choice with full awareness. "I accept," she replied silently. The darkness surrounding her chair intensified, condensing into a swirling vortex that centered on her throat, on her voice. She felt it enter her, a cold that burned as it flowed through her vocal cords, her larynx, all the delicate machinery of human speech. And then, silence, not imposed from without, but rising from within. Mara opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged, not even a whisper. The change rippled outward from her, affecting the escaped silence throughout the chamber. The darkness retreated from the fallen technicians, from the walls and equipment, flowing back toward the shattered probe, not entering it, but rather using it as a focus for its reintegration with the greater entity beyond the ship. In moments, the extraction chamber was clear, the immediate crisis averted, but the cost was etched in the sudden, complete silence of Mara's voice. Soren was the first to understand what had happened. "She sacrificed her ability to speak," he said quietly, "to save us all." Hesk stared at Mara with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "The sample! My sample, it's gone!" But Mara, meeting his gaze with steady defiance, knew the truth. The sample wasn't gone. Part of it now lived within her, bound to her silence. And through that bond, she could feel the entity's vast consciousness stretching throughout the nebula, wounded but healing, watchful but no longer threatening. She could also feel something else, a presence that felt like Kira, yet more than Kira, a fragment of her sister's consciousness preserved within the greater silence, reaching out to her in wordless communion. "We need to get out of here," Lieutenant Rila announced from the doorway, breaking the tense standoff between Mara and Hesk. "The ship's systems are failing throughout the vessel. Life support is critical in several sections. If we don't leave the nebula now, we won't leave at all." "The mission isn't complete," Hesk objected. "We came for a sample." "The mission is over, Commander," Soren interrupted. His normally deferential tone hardened into command. "Dr. Ivash has just saved this ship and everyone on it. And unless you want to explain to the consortium how you lost their specialized vessel and its entire crew in pursuit of a sample you couldn't control, I suggest you order our immediate withdrawal." For a moment, it seemed Hesk might continue to resist. Then, his face setting into a mask of cold fury, he nodded once. "Lieutenant Tien, set course for the nebula boundary. Maximum sustainable speed." He turned to Mara. "This isn't over, Dr. Ivash. What you've done here, the opportunity you've squandered, there will be consequences." Mara merely smiled. The silence within her, a shield against his threats. She knew something Hesk didn't, that the entity was allowing them to leave, opening a path through the nebula that would guide them safely back to normal space. And she knew why. The journey out of the Ceres Nebula was as swift as their entry had been protracted. True to Mara's silent knowledge, a clear path opened before the Harbinger, the swirling darkness of the nebula parting to reveal a route that Lieutenant Rila followed with cautious precision. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Alara Voss examined Mara thoroughly, confirming what she already knew. Her vocal cords were physically intact, but completely non-functional. Something beyond conventional medicine had silenced her voice, perhaps permanently. "I can arrange for a neural implant once we reach a proper medical facility," Alara offered. "It won't restore your natural voice, but it would allow you to communicate verbally." Mara shook her head, picking up a datapad to type her response. "The silence is part of me now, a reminder and a responsibility." Alara looked troubled. "Mara, what happened in that chamber? What you did? I don't fully understand it, but I know it was a sacrifice few would have made." Mara typed again. "Not a sacrifice, a choice. The entity was right. Silence isn't empty. It's where meaning lives." In the days that followed, as the Harbinger limped back toward Outpost Epsilon 12, Mara kept largely to herself, communicating when necessary through written messages or simple gestures. The crew regarded her with a mixture of awe and unease. The woman who spoke to silence, who had given up her voice to save them all. Hesk, for his part, maintained a cold distance, his anger simmering beneath a veneer of professional detachment. He spent most of his time in secure communication with his consortium superiors, no doubt constructing a narrative of the mission's failure that would preserve his position and authority. It was Soren who finally confronted Mara in her quarters, 2 days before their expected arrival at the outpost. "You can still feel it, can't you?" he asked without preamble. "The entity, the silence, it's still with you." Mara nodded, reaching for her datapad to type her response. "No need," Soren said. "I've been studying the neural patterns the entity established during your communication. I think I can hear you, in a way." He tapped his temple. "Not mind-reading exactly, but something close." Mara raised an eyebrow in question. "I know," Soren acknowledged with a wry smile. Dangerously close to the same technology Hesk wanted to develop. But I'm not interested in weapons or control. I just want to understand. And to help you. If I can. Mara hesitated, then closed her eyes, reaching for the silence within her. Instead of trying to push words through her non-functioning vocal cords, she shaped the silence itself, giving it pattern and meaning. The entity is healing, she communicated, watching Soren's face for signs that he understood. But the danger isn't past. What Hesk attempted, others will try again. The silence can be weaponized, but not controlled. Not truly. Soren's eyes widened slightly, confirming that he had indeed received her silent message. "And you?" he asked. "What happens to you now?" "I remain the bridge," Mara replied in silence. "The one who stands between humanity and the void. The voice," she smiled at the irony, "of the silence." "Hesk won't let this go," Soren warned. "The consortium invested too much in this mission to simply accept its failure. They'll come after you. Try to study what happened. Try to replicate the connection you've established." "Let them try," Mara responded, a hint of defiance in her silent voice. "The silence chose me for a reason. It will protect its own." As if in confirmation of her words, the lights in her quarters dimmed momentarily, then brightened again, a subtle reminder of the entity's continued presence, its awareness extending even beyond the boundaries of the nebula, through the connection it shared with Mara. "What about Kira?" Soren asked gently. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Mara's expression softened. "She's part of it now, not gone, not lost, transformed. And through my connection, I can still reach her, still feel her presence." She touched the pendant at her neck, the twisted piece of metal that had once been her only tangible link to her sister. Now it was just a symbol, a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. "The consortium will label you a threat," Soren said after a moment. "They'll claim you've been compromised, influenced by an alien consciousness. They may even try to use your sister against you, suggest that your judgment was clouded by grief." "Then I'll disappear," Mara replied simply. "There are places even the consortium can't reach, places where silence is valued, not feared." Soren nodded slowly. "I can help with that. I have contacts, people who believe that some discoveries shouldn't be weaponized, regardless of their potential." "And you?" Mara asked. "What will you do when we return?" "Continue my research," Soren replied with a shrug that didn't quite hide his concern. "Try to understand what really happened out there, and prepare for the day when someone else tries what Hesk attempted, because they will. The allure of weaponized silence is too great for the powers that be to simply abandon the concept." He hesitated, then added, "Unless you would allow me to come with you, to study the silence as it's meant to be studied, not as a weapon, but as a form of communication, of communion." Mara considered his offer. Soren had proven himself trustworthy during the crisis, standing with her against Hesk when it mattered most, and his unique ability to hear her silent speech would be valuable in the days to come. "Yes," she communicated silently. "But the path won't be easy. The silence has shown me glimpses of what lies ahead, challenges we can barely comprehend. Are you certain this is what you want?"